Hey GSTLs, hope you're having a fantastic start to your week so far. It's been a little while since I sent you a GSTL video, but wanted to go ahead and send you one for this week as we are going to start sending out invitations to our Ransom Church Guest Services training for Saturday, November 3rd, coming up here in just a couple of weeks. And so one of the things I really wanted to do for you guys before we get you more details as far as like what to expect for the training and all those other details is I want to give you all kind of a scope or a rundown of the exact content of what we're talking about at this training. So that way you guys are aware of the direction that we're going and that whole thing. So, because if you weren't there at our guest services meeting back in August, we kind of did like a really quick rundown through this. But the big thing that we're hitting on here is the why behind guest services. It's just been a while since I think we've gotten our ministry and department together to really hone back in on the why we do what we do. How does guest services contribute to setting captives free? And I think it's very easy, if we're not careful, for guest services to become a ministry that's filled with a bunch of really good tasks, but separated from the why. That's really all they are. It's just really good tasks. And so this is just to try to get all of us on the same page and to own a phrase that I think really captures what we do and why we do what we do. And you've heard me say this a ton. It's to set captives free by creating belonging. We exist to create belonging, and I'm going to be running through a lot of how our culture today in America is currently riddled with what medical experts are calling a loneliness epidemic. In other words, people are feeling lonely and incredibly isolated and disconnected more than ever before. And there was a study that even went out at the beginning of this year that the number one thing that people are looking for when they go to a new church is community and connection. There was a point where really great experiences, the guest service experience, that culture, that was something the guests were really looking to, or new church members were really looking forward to a good church experience. But now it's shifting from where they're not really caring as much about the exceptional experience, the wow moments, as much as it is a place that they can really belong to and that they can find community. So we're going to be looking at some of the stats of that in American culture. We're going to be looking at some of the crazy effects that loneliness has on people's lives and wrestling with how can guest services specifically meet that need. If 50% of Americans are wrestling with feeling lonely, then that means 50% of people coming into our church doors, whether they're new guests or they've been longtime attenders, are struggling with loneliness. So how can we create a culture where those people belong, where every single action that we do, every single pot of coffee we make, every single handout we pass out, with every single car that we park, with every single thing we do, it's functioning through this lens of we exist to create belonging. Every single task is an opportunity to invite someone into finding relationships. So one of the things we're going to talk about is there's this phenomenon called the 4 spaces of interaction, or the 4 social spheres of interaction. And basically it kind of compartmentalizes all the different depths of our relationships that we have. And science says that people who have significant relationships in all 4 of these spaces are most likely to feel like they belong and that they're the most connected. And the first space is the intimate space. You have this with 1 to 2 people. These are people who just know everything about you. Typically a spouse, family member, or a really, really, really deep spiritual friend is that. The second space is the personal space. You have about 6 to 8 of these. All this is relative to how many people you have in your life, but these are people who know more about you, not to the depth of intimate friends, but these are like they're personal friends, and that they know a lot more about those deeper depths of you. You're doing life with these people. These are their longtime friends from high school, college, workplaces. You know what those are. The third space is the social space. This is a little bit larger. These are people who have snapshots of you or a general idea of who you are, but you haven't invited them into being really close personal friends yet. Then the fourth space is where guest services comes in. It's a public space. It's a space where people gather for a common purpose. So like a Twin City baseball game, or a Broncos football game, or going to the mall, or a restaurant, or even a church. The number one commonality that all those people have is that they're in this space specifically for that common reason of being there. You might not know the stranger next to you at a Broncos game, but you have the one commonality that you're both there for the Broncos game. Same thing with going to a Ransom church service. And when people come to a public gathering worship space like the Ransom, then the number one thing that they're going to be exposed to is the culture of why they're there. You know, when they come in, people constantly say about the Ransom that they just have a culture. We have a culture where people feel comfortable, like they can fully be themselves. And that is so much of what is needed to create belonging. And so the deeper question then that I'm going to pose, and I'm going to create some specific scenarios of what does this look like. But when we ask ourselves, what do we do as guest services that does a great job of creating belonging? And then what do we do as guest services currently that doesn't do a good job of creating belonging, that we need to stop doing? Or are there actual tasks we're doing that are hindering us from creating the space of people finding community? And then thirdly, what are we not doing to create belonging that we should start doing? And just start brainstorming what are some new innovative ways for how we can completely change or add to what we're doing that's just going to accelerate what we do. One of those things that I'm going to toss out there for our teams to wrestle with, for you guys to kind of head up discussion with your teams, is what about the idea of having people in the warehouse before service starts, interacting with people? Maybe you have those exceptionally extroverted people who love to just meet new strangers while people are sitting down, because they're talking about how the number one place that's just the hardest place for new guests is the 10 minutes before service starts after they're seated. They can have an amazing time where their cars are parked, they have great experiences in the lobby and as they're entering the warehouse, and that's great, or in the worship center. But as soon as they sit down and they're sitting there, they become painfully aware of how alone they are. Because they're like, oh, it's just studies are showing that's the number one place where guests have a poor experience, not because we're not treating them well, but just because dealing with that tension and awkwardness of being in the worship center without knowing anybody adds up a lot. So how can we even meet that need? And amongst of so many other ideas, but that's kind of the gist of where we're heading and what the whole goal of the training is. It's putting this whole perspective of creating belonging out there, drilling it into our heads and as team members, and continuing to drill into your heads as leaders, because as you guys are going to be leading your teams in discussion and trying to get everybody on board with this, that's going to be the number one thing. And lastly, the last thing that I'll touch on is we're also going to talk about how our goal to create belonging, to create a culture of belonging at the Ransom, is also extremely important for us to have this discipleship culture that we're pushing. For people to even find the relationships to be in these discipleship-making relationships is so crucial, but the way on how they're going to do that is when they can feel like they can belong, and we have a large part in creating that culture for that. And even people can get into discipleship relationships through our guest services teams. And that's something we're continuing to wrestle with and trying to figure out exactly how we're going to do that. But I want to get all this on your guys' radars. Thanks to you for watching an 8-minute video. I didn't expect this to be that long, but that's where we're going. And I could not be more excited. I could not be more excited for this. So stay tuned, and we're looking forward to it.